The desert winds whispered across the frontier as the sun sank behind jagged cliffs, painting the sky in blood-red streaks. A cowboy, hardened by endless miles and battles with man and nature, thought he had seen it all. But that evening, when he stumbled upon a veiled figure at the edge of a forgotten trail, something in her trembling presence pulled him to a halt. She begged him not to look, her voice sharp with fear and desperation. Yet when the veil slipped from her face, what he saw rooted him to the earth, forever altering his understanding of justice, cruelty, and truth. The frontier was a land of contradictions. To the settlers, it was a promise of freedom, vast acres of opportunity, and a chance to carve destiny with bare hands. But for those who had lived there long before, the native tribes, it had become a land of loss, betrayal, and blood. Jed Carter was no stranger to this paradox. He was a cowboy by trade, riding cattle trails from Texas up through New Mexico. Rough around the edges, sun-scorched and solitary, he had learned to survive with grit and silence. Jed carried no illusions of heroism, just a steady hand, a sharp eye, and a heart weighed down by things he never said aloud. On a late summer evening, Jed found himself riding alone through an abandoned valley near the Pecos River. The air was thick with dust and silence, broken only by the rhythmic clop of his horse. He noticed her then, a lone woman, veiled, hunched at the base of a dead mesquite tree. She seemed out of place, almost ghost-like, as if the desert had spat her out. Her frame trembled, her hands clutching at fabric as though it were her last shield against the world. Something in her presence stirred Jed's instincts. This was not a scene of chance, it reeked of pain, of secrets untold. As he approached, she raised a shaking hand. Her voice, barely above a whisper, carried both fear and warning. "Don't look at me." But in a land where cruelty was currency and silence often meant complicity, Jed Carter knew that turning away would come at a cost. The cowboy had witnessed enough suffering to recognize it when it stood before him. The veiled woman's plea haunted the stillness, her words heavy with shame and terror. Yet the fabric she clutched so desperately seemed like both a protection and a prison. Jed dismounted slowly, his boots crunching against dry earth. He stayed back, sensing her distrust, but his eyes scanned the horizon. Tracks in the dust told part of the story. Wagon wheels, boot prints, and the unmistakable drag marks of struggle. Whoever had left her there had done so without mercy. The woman's veil fluttered in the wind, and for a moment Jed caught sight of the bruises beneath. His chest tightened. He knew the pattern too well. Frontier justice wasn't justice at all. It was domination, where the strong preyed on the vulnerable. To be a native woman during these years was to be hunted, silenced, and stripped of dignity. Though she pleaded with him to leave, Jed's conscience weighed heavy. He had lived by the code of the trail: never interfere, never get tangled in another's fight. But he also carried ghosts of the past, women he hadn't saved, men he hadn't stopped, injustices he had turned from because it was easier. As the minutes stretched on, he pieced together fragments. The woman had likely been captured by settlers, or worse, soldiers, treated as less than human, then discarded when her silence and survival no longer amused them. Her veil wasn't simply cloth. It was a desperate attempt to hide the scars that the world had written on her face and soul. Jed's mind wrestled between two instincts: survival or intervention. Helping her could mean trouble, the kind that followed you with bullets and fire, but ignoring her meant adding another name to the list of the forgotten. The woman trembled, whispering again, "Don't look at me," not out of arrogance, but because the truth of her suffering was too painful to bear. But the frontier had taught Jed something vital. Ignoring pain didn't erase it. It only gave cruelty more room to grow. As dusk deepened into night, the cowboy made his choice. He offered her water, set a fire at a careful distance, and stood watch. He would not strip her of dignity by forcing her veil away, but he also knew truth had a way of revealing itself when silence could no longer contain it. The firelight flickered against the veil, casting ghostly shadows across the desert floor. For hours the woman sat rigid, her silence louder than any scream. Finally, as the night deepened, the desert winds rose and tugged at her covering. She clutched at it, desperate, but the fabric slipped through her bruised fingers. The veil dropped. Jed froze. Her face bore the brutal testimony of cruelty, lashes across her skin, scars where blades and fists had left their mark, and eyes so hollowed by suffering they seemed carved from stone. Yet beneath the ruin, there was still defiance, a quiet flame that refused to die. The cowboy's breath caught in his throat. He had seen death, blood, and battlefield horrors, but nothing struck him like the sight of what men had done to her. This wasn't just brutality, it was erasure. They hadn't tried to kill her. They had tried to erase her humanity. The moment seared into Jed's mind. He realized that this wasn't a single story. It was the story of countless women on the frontier, their pain silenced by the dust of history. Her plea for him not to look had been less about shame, and more about the unbearable weight of being seen, of being remembered. But Jed Carter did see her, and in seeing, he carried a burden far greater than silence. The dawn came quietly, spreading, pale light across the valley. Jed saddled his horse, but he did not ride away. Instead, he stood with the woman, veiled once more, though now he knew the truth behind the cloth. He offered no empty promises, no talk of salvation. What he offered was presence, his decision not to turn from her suffering, not to let her vanish into the endless cruelty of the land. In those still hours, Jed Carter understood something he had ignored for too long. The frontier wasn't built on freedom for all. It was built on the backs of the silenced, the dispossessed, the broken. And the greatest injustice wasn't just the violence, it was the forgetting. The woman would carry her scars forever, but Jed too would carry something, the knowledge that silence is complicity, that looking away is as cruel as raising a hand. As he finally rode away, her figure growing smaller against the rising sun, he asked himself a question that gnawed at him. How many more veils had fallen in the dust unseen? How many more stories were buried beneath silence? The desert swallowed his horse's tracks, but the weight of the moment lingered. Some truths can never be forgotten, and perhaps that is the beginning of justice, not in grand gestures, but in refusing to let the forgotten remain invisible.